The Trap of Togetherness: Why Solitude is the Price of Clarity. Have you ever felt more alone in a crowd than in a room by yourself? I ask because it's a feeling that haunts those who think deeply. We're told that social life is the heart of human experience, that our connections define our meaning. But what if that's the greatest lie never questioned? What if smart people, those who live deliberately, have sensed something darker beneath the surface of constant interaction? In this video, we explore a cost you may be paying without realizing it. A cost that Schopenhauer, the master of philosophical pessimism, saw with terrifying clarity. If you've ever wondered why people exhaust you, or why silence feels more genuine than small talk, you're not alone. But here's the catch: only a few are brave enough to stop paying for the illusion of connection. Are you?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
We live in a world that rewards noise. The louder you are, the more visible you become. The more you socialize, the more you're celebrated. But in this economy of attention, something subtle is traded away: your inner life. Schopenhauer warned us, a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. The moment we enter a room, we become part of a performance. We adjust, we shrink, we inflate, we mimic. We become less of ourselves and more of what is expected. That's the hidden cost: your authenticity. And smart people, those who value inner clarity over outer approval, eventually recognize that the price is too high. But here's the uncomfortable question: how often do you betray yourself just to be accepted? I've seen it over and over again, not just in philosophy but in life. People surround themselves with others to escape their thoughts, not to engage with them. Parties, group chats, endless meetings, they're distractions, not connections. We fear solitude because we fear what it reveals. But solitude is not loneliness. It's the space where the mind breathes, where your thoughts are not interrupted by the turbulence of others' opinions. Schopenhauer saw solitude not as a punishment but as a sanctuary. And this is where the contradiction becomes sharp. The more intelligent you are, the more you need solitude, and yet the lonelier you feel when you embrace it. So I ask you, is it better to be authentic and alone, or accepted and hollow? Society doesn't make this choice easy. From childhood, we're trained to seek approval. We're taught that being liked is a virtue, that being social is healthy, and that being too quiet is a flaw. But think about who profits from this programming. A society that thrives on conformity needs you to be predictable, agreeable, and distracted. Silence is dangerous because it leads to thinking, and thinking leads to questioning, and questioning leads to freedom. That's why smart people often choose the margins. They see the machinery and refuse to be gears in it. They realize that the cost of social life is not just time or energy, it's the erosion of self. Are you willing to pay that price forever? The tyranny of the crowd: how the collective mind destroys individual greatness. There's a sinister paradox at the heart of all social life. The more we participate in it, the more we lose ourselves to it. The crowd has a mind, but it is not a thinking mind. It is a reacting, echoing, imitating mind. And the moment you become a part of it, your thinking begins to decay. You don't realize it immediately. It happens subtly. You laugh at what others laugh at. You fear what others fear. You believe what others believe, not because you've examined the belief, but because it feels safer not to resist. But here's the truth that only the few dare to confront: the crowd is not wise. It is not just. It is not even real. It is an illusion created by fear and sustained by conformity. And Schopenhauer saw this clearly. He wrote that the more a man is capable of thinking for himself, the more he will seek to avoid the crowd. You may think you're immune. You may believe that you're still your own person, even as you scroll like follow and nod along. But pause and ask yourself, when was the last time you held a belief that isolated you? When was the last time you spoke a truth that made others uncomfortable? When was the last time you stood alone in your opinion and refused to back down, not out of stubbornness but integrity? These are the moments that define true individuality, and they are rare precisely because the social cost of authenticity is so high. Smart people see this cost, and instead of paying it, they choose exile, mental, emotional, sometimes even physical. They choose it because they understand something most people never learn: greatness is allergic to consensus. We often romanticize the idea of the genius, the visionary, the revolutionary. But what we forget is that every one of these individuals had to walk away from the crowd to become who they were. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Kafka, Kierkegaard, they were all loners. Not because they hated people, but because they refused to drown in the ocean of mediocrity. They understood that the herd never leads, it follows. And to lead, to create, to see the world with clear eyes, you must walk upstream. You must risk misunderstanding. You must endure solitude not as suffering, but as purification. So ask yourself, if you never displease anyone, have you ever truly been yourself? The problem is that social life rewards imitation over innovation. It's safer to mimic than to invent. It's easier to echo than to originate. And over time, this safety becomes a prison. You stop thinking new thoughts. You stop questioning old ones. You become a vessel for borrowed ideas, recycled opinions, and fashionable outrage. Schopenhauer believed that the masses live in a state of semi-consciousness, not because they're unintelligent, but because they never pause long enough to examine their lives. And the reason they never pause is because they are never alone. They are always in motion, always in dialogue, always absorbing. But reflection requires stillness. And stillness requires solitude. Can you see now why the crowd fears the thinker? This is why the smart ones refuse to pay the cost. They see what social life demands: the erosion of your edge, the dulling of your instincts, the replacement of your inner compass with an external map. And if you're not careful, you lose the ability to think in terms of truth altogether. You start thinking in terms of acceptability. Will this offend? Will this be liked? Will this make sense to them? But what if the truth doesn't make sense to them? What if the truth is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or unpopular? Are you still willing to speak it? The greatest thinkers never asked, "Will I be understood?" They asked, "Is this true?" And that's the difference. That's the dividing line between the masses and the mind that ascends. Let me be brutally honest, the crowd will not save you. It will not enlighten you. It will not elevate you. It will only sedate you. It will keep you entertained, distracted, and docile. And then, when you finally realize that your best years were spent chasing validation, it will be too late. You'll look back and see that all your originality was sacrificed on the altar of approval. But the smart ones, those rare souls who step away, who embrace the silence, who dare to face their own minds, they carry something different. Not just intelligence, but independence. not just awareness, but sovereignty. They don't belong to the crowd because they belong to themselves. So here's the ultimate question: do you want to be popular or do you want to be free? Because in most cases you can't be both. Schopenhauer understood that the pursuit of wisdom is a solitary one. Not because people are evil, but because they are noisy. And wisdom cannot grow in noise. It grows in quiet, in contemplation, in the painful but liberating process of thinking for yourself. If you're not willing to pay that price, then you'll pay another one, the price of a life half lived, thoughts half formed, and truths half spoken. But if you are willing, if you are brave enough to walk alone, you'll find something the crowd can never offer: the clarity of your own mind. The freedom and silence, why the alone are closer to truth than the connected. There is a kind of freedom that very few people ever taste, not because it's rare, but because it's terrifying. It's the freedom that comes when you no longer need the approval of others. When you no longer need to be seen, heard, or validated. When your primary relationship is with your own mind. That kind of freedom is found in silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the absence of need. It's in that silence that truth emerges. And Schopenhauer, perhaps more than any other philosopher, understood that silence is not emptiness, it's clarity. It's the space where the soul finally stops performing and starts perceiving. So let me ask you, when was the last time you sat in complete silence, not out of boredom, but out of reverence for what you might find? We live in an age of hyperconnection. Every second of every day is filled with pings, notifications, updates, and algorithms screaming for our attention. We are more connected than ever, yet more distracted, more anxious, more confused. Why? Because connection without depth is noise. It's a constant stream of shallow contact that drowns the deeper voice within. Schopenhauer believed that truth is not something shouted from the rooftops. It is whispered in solitude, and those who are always connected never hear it. They are plugged into the collective consciousness, which is often not conscious at all, but reactive, tribal, and impulsive. To think clearly, you must disconnect. And not just from devices, but from the need to belong. This is why the smartest people often appear withdrawn, aloof, or even cold. They're not antisocial, they're anti-superficial. They understand that most social interactions are not exchanges of truth, but rituals of reassurance. We say things we don't mean. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We nod along with ideas we don't believe. Why? Because we fear the silence that follows honesty. But Schopenhauer would argue that silence is not what we should fear, it's the only place where anything real can begin. So ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped performing? If you let the silence speak and actually listened? There is a sacredness to being alone with your thoughts. In that space, you begin to see the world without the filters imposed by others. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And it hurts. Oh, it hurts. Because in that silence, you see all the compromises you've made, all the masks you've worn, all the truths you've silenced to keep the peace. But that pain is beautiful. It means you're waking up. Schopenhauer knew that solitude wasn't an escape, it was a confrontation. A confrontation with the self. And only those who are willing to face themselves can ever hope to understand life. Think of it like this. Most people live like mirrors. They reflect whatever is around them. But the smart ones, they live like windows. They let the light in, but they stay transparent. They don't distort. They don't project. they observe. And that observation, that quiet witnessing of the world, is where wisdom begins. You can't do that when you're constantly reacting. You can't do that when you're constantly needing to be seen. You can't do that when your identity depends on likes, shares, or even praise. You can only do that when you're willing to be invisible to others in order to be visible to yourself. So what's the takeaway here? It's simple, but not easy. If you want to preserve your mind, if you want to live a life of deep thought and clarity, you must learn to protect your solitude. You must learn to say no, not just to others, but to the version of yourself that craves applause. You must turn inward, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for the truth that lives there. Schopenhauer said, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." Modern life fights this truth with every fiber of its being. But if you want to live fully, not just socially, you have to fight back. You have to reclaim the sacred space of silence, even when the world tells you it's loneliness. And here's the final question I'll leave you with. If your thoughts were a room, would you want to be alone in it? Would it be peaceful, or would it be noisy with other people's voices? Would it be filled with your own insights, or cluttered with borrowed beliefs? The hidden cost of social life is that we often never get to find out. We never spend enough time in that room to know ourselves. But the smart ones, they go in. They sit quietly. They listen, and eventually they hear something the crowd never will, their own voice, finally speaking.